The small town of Clearwater, Montana, nestled between towering pine forests and rolling hills, had always been a peaceful place. With just over 2,000 residents, it was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where people waved from porches, and where children rode bikes down quiet streets. But that was before the Iron Serpents came. The gang rolled into Clearwater 6 months ago, their roaring motorcycles echoing like a storm through the narrow streets. At first, they were just a curiosity, a rough-looking group stopping for gas and food at Maggie Turner's diner. But their presence quickly darkened. They stayed longer, taking over the town's only motel, and soon, their influence spread like a shadow. Businesses were hit with protection fees. Residents were intimidated into silence, and the once friendly streets now seemed to hum with tension. Ethan Cross, the middle-aged owner of Cross Hardware, watched it all unfold from the corner of Main Street. A man of few words, Ethan had always been content to run his store quietly, helping locals with repairs and offering advice on everything from leaky pipes to stubborn engines. But the Iron Serpent's presence weighed on him. He'd seen this kind of bullying before, years ago, in places far from Clearwater. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan stood outside his shop, raising the American flag as he did every day. The ritual had been his way of honoring his past, a reminder of his time as a soldier during the Gulf War. His movements were slow but deliberate, his hands steady despite the chill in the air. Across the street, Maggie Turner stood at the door of her diner, wiping her hands on her apron. She was in her late 40s, with sharp blue eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that hit a heart as big as the mountains surrounding the town. She waved. "Coffee's getting cold, Ethan," she called. Ethan nodded. "Almost done." As the flag reached the top of the pole, the rumble of motorcycles broke the morning calm. Four bikers from the Iron Serpents rolled down Main Street, their leather jackets bearing the gang's coiled snake emblem. They slowed as they passed Ethan's shop, the lead rider flashing a predatory grin. One of them, a lanky man with a scar across his cheek, deliberately kicked over a sidewalk display of garden tools. "Clean that up, old man," he sneered, his voice carrying across the street. Maggie froze in the diner doorway, her eyes narrowing. Ethan simply stared at the men, his expression unreadable. He watched them ride off before bending to pick up the scattered tools. Inside the diner, the mood was tense. Regulars like Jim Carter, the town's mechanic, and Sarah Caldwell, the librarian, whispered about the gang's growing boldness. Maggie poured Ethan a fresh cup of coffee as he sat at the counter. "They're pushing harder," Maggie said, her voice low. "First it's protection fees, now they're smashing up the place." Ethan took a sip of coffee, his gaze distant. Bullies only stop when they're forced to. Sheriff Lucas Miller entered the diner, his uniform crisp but his face lined with worry. Barely 30, Lucas was new to the job, having inherited it from his retired father. He nodded at Ethan and Maggie, then sighed as he took a seat. "Morning, Sheriff," Maggie said, setting a coffee in front of him. "Rough night?" "Another report of vandalism," Lucas replied. "The Serpents hit the Jenkins farm last night. Broke windows, slashed tires. Jenkins says he's thinking of packing up and moving." "They're scaring people into running," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm, clearing the way for them to take over. Lucas nodded grimly. "I don't have the manpower to stop them. Every time we try something, they're one step ahead. And people are too scared to testify." Maggie folded her arms. "So what? We just let them run the town?" The sheriff looked at her helplessly. "I don't know what else to do." Ethan set his cup down and leaned forward. "You do what you can, Sheriff. But sometimes, you need help." Maggie glanced at him, her brows knitting in concern. "What are you thinking, Ethan?" Ethan didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted to the flag outside, its stars and stripes fluttering in the breeze. Memories stirred, faces of comrades, moments of camaraderie forged in the heat of battle. "I'm thinking it's time this town remembers what it stands for," he said quietly. Later that night, the Iron Serpents sent their clearest message yet. As Ethan prepared to close his shop, he smelled smoke. Rushing outside, he saw flames licking at the flagpole, the American flag reduced to a smoldering heap on the ground. The bikers roared away, their laughter echoing through the darkness. Ethan stood silently, staring at the ashes. Maggie appeared at his side, her fists clenched. Ethan, this has gone too far. They're tearing this town apart. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't say a word, but Maggie saw the determination in his eyes. The next morning, Ethan placed a call. The number was old, scribbled in the corner of a worn notebook he kept in his desk. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Ethan Cross? Yeah, it's me, Ethan replied. I need a favor. There was a pause on the other end. Then, it's been a while. What kind of favor? Ethan looked out the window at the charred remains of the flag. The kind only brothers can answer. The voice on the line grew serious. Tell me where and when. Ethan hung up, his mind already calculating the next steps. Across the street, Maggie watched him through the diner window, her expression a mix of worry and hope. She didn't know what Ethan had planned, but she knew one thing for sure. Clearwater wasn't going down without a fight. The quiet hum of the hardware store was a sharp contrast to the storm brewing in Ethan Cross's mind. After making the call, he spent the night in his workshop, repairing the flagpole. By dawn, he had raised a new flag. This one was pristine, its bold colors catching the early light. For Ethan, it wasn't just a flag, it was a statement. Across the street, Maggie Turner watched from the diner. She could see the set of Ethan's shoulders, the slow, deliberate way he tied off the halyard. She knew that when Ethan moved like that, something big was coming. Later that morning, the sound of approaching engines echoed down Main Street. But this time, it wasn't the Iron Serpents. The first to arrive was Tom "Bulldog" Hayes, a towering man in his 50s with a thick gray beard and eyes that could cut through steel. His bike rumbled to a stop outside Ethan's hardware store. Tom dismounted, pulled off his helmet, and grinned. Still flying the colors, huh? Ethan stepped out of the store and clasped his old friend's hand. Always. Not long after, more bikes followed. Angela Sparrow Martin, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a laptop bag slung over her shoulder, arrived next. She greeted Ethan with a salute. Still recruiting the old squad, I see. By noon, 6 more veterans had rolled into Clearwater. Each one was a testament to Ethan's time in the Gulf War, where they had formed bonds stronger than blood. Tom had been Ethan's second-in-command, Angela their logistics and communications expert. The others brought their own skills. Mark, a sniper, Luis, an engineer, Chris, a medic, and Jess, a strategist who could outthink almost anyone. The townsfolk watched from windows and porches as the convoy arrived. For months, the Iron Serpents had been the only ones riding loud in Clearwater. Now, the rumble of these new arrivals sent a different message. Inside Maggie's diner, the veterans gathered around a large table. Maggie served them coffee and sandwiches, her eyes flicking between Ethan and the others. This feels like the start of something big, she said, setting down a tray. It is, Ethan replied, his tone calm but firm. The Iron Serpents think they can push this town around because no one stood up to them. That changes now. Tom leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. So, what's the plan, boss? We can't just go charging in. These punks aren't playing by rules. They're not the only ones, Ethan said. He laid out a map of the town, marking key locations. The Iron Serpents' makeshift clubhouse at the old mill, known gang hangouts, and vulnerable spots like Maggie's diner and the sheriff's station. We're going to defend this town, but we're doing it smart, Ethan continued. First, we train the people who want to fight back. Teach them how to protect themselves, how to keep watch. Second, we make it clear to the Iron Serpents that their games end here. Sheriff Lucas entered the diner mid-conversation, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. You brought reinforcements, he said, eyeing the group. Ethan nodded. We're here to help, Sheriff, not take over. But we'll need your cooperation. Lucas hesitated. I appreciate what you're doing, but I don't want this turning into a war zone. It won't, Ethan assured him. We're not looking for a fight. We're looking to end one. Lucas took a seat, running a hand through his hair. I'm in. Just tell me what you need. The veterans wasted no time. By afternoon, they were setting up training stations in the community center's parking lot. Townsfolk trickled in, curious and wary. Ethan stood before them, his voice steady and commanding. "This isn't just about standing up to a gang," he said. "It's about taking back our town. Every one of you has something to offer. Strength, courage, knowledge. Together, we're stronger than they'll ever be." The training began with basic self-defense, surveillance, and communication. Maggie recruited volunteers to organize shifts for patrolling the town. Sheriff Lucas deputized a few trusted residents, giving them radios to stay in constant contact. At first, the response was hesitant, but as the day went on, confidence grew. People who had once avoided the Iron Serpent's gaze now stood a little taller. Meanwhile, Angela Sparrow Martin worked from Ethan's office, setting up a surveillance network using donated equipment and a few tricks from her military days. She tapped into local security cameras and set up drones for aerial reconnaissance. By nightfall, Clearwater was no longer a town cowering in fear. It was a town preparing to fight back. The Iron Serpents took notice. That evening, their leader, Victor Kane, arrived at the mill. He was a lean, sharp-featured man with cold eyes that burned with arrogance. The gang gathered in the dimly lit space, the air thick with the smell of oil and alcohol. Kane slammed a knife into a table, silencing the room. "I hear there's some new blood in town," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Some wannabe heroes stirring up trouble. Let's remind Clearwater who runs this place." The gang cheered, but there was an undercurrent of unease. Word had spread about the veterans, men and women who didn't scare easily. Back at the diner, Ethan and his team finalized their plans. Maggie brewed fresh coffee as the group strategized late into the night. "We'll keep the pressure on," Ethan said. "Every time they push, we push back harder. But we don't cross the line. No violence unless it's absolutely necessary." "What if they don't give us a choice?" Tom asked. Ethan met his gaze. "Then we make sure they regret it." Outside, the new flag waved proudly under the stars, a silent symbol of resilience and unity. The battle for Clearwater had begun, but Ethan and his team were ready. They weren't just fighting to defend a town. They were fighting to prove that even in the face of fear and intimidation, good people could stand strong together. The tension in Clearwater was palpable. With the arrival of Ethan's old squad, the town had found hope, but hope alone wouldn't stop the Iron Serpents. The gang's leader, Victor Kane, wasn't one to back down easily, and his crew had spent months tightening their grip on the town. Now, they were being openly challenged, and they wouldn't let that go unanswered. Early the next morning, Maggie Turner opened her diner to find a snake painted in red across her front window, the Iron Serpent's mark. Her heart sank, but anger quickly replaced her fear. She grabbed a rag and a bucket of soapy water and started scrubbing. By the time Ethan arrived with Tom, Bulldog, Hayes, the mark was half gone. "They're sending a message," Maggie said, not stopping her scrubbing. Ethan inspected the vandalism, his expression calm. "Then we'll send one back." Tom grinned, cracking his knuckles. "What's the play, boss?" "Not brute force," Ethan said. "We're going to show them that intimidation doesn't work anymore." "Maggie, you keep scrubbing." "Tom, let's get to work." By mid-morning, the window was clean, and Ethan's team had installed a pair of high-definition security cameras overlooking the diner. Angela Sparrow Martin was already monitoring the footage from her makeshift command center in the back of Ethan's hardware store. Across town, the veterans moved quickly to fortify Clearwater. Luis, the team's engineer, worked with local volunteers to reinforce vulnerable buildings. At the sheriff's station, Chris, the medic, trained a small group of townsfolk in first aid and crisis response. But Ethan knew that preparation wasn't enough. To truly protect the town, they had to make the Iron Serpents rethink their position. That meant showing the gang that Clearwater was no longer easy prey. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That evening, Victor Kane sent 3 of his men to collect dues from Dan and Linda Parker, the elderly owners of Parker's Auto Shop. The Parkers had been running the shop for 40 years, but in recent months, the Iron Serpents had bled them dry with so-called protection fees. This time, when the bikers arrived, they found Ethan, Tom, and Sheriff Lucas waiting for them. "Evening," Ethan said, stepping out of the shadows. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen war. The lead biker, a burly man with tattoos snaking up his neck, sneered. You lost, old man? This is our business. No, Ethan replied evenly. This is the Parkers' business, and you're not welcome here. The biker laughed, glancing at his companions. You got a death wish or something? Ethan didn't flinch. Walk away. You're not getting a dime. Tom stepped forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow. We're only going to say it once. For a moment, it looked like the bikers might push back, but the sight of Sheriff Lucas standing firm, his hand resting on his holstered sidearm, gave them pause. After a tense beat, the lead biker spat on the ground. This ain't over, he growled. Good, Ethan said. We'll be ready. As the bikers roared away, Linda Parker stepped out from behind the counter, tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling. We thought we'd lost everything. You haven't, Ethan said gently. Not while we're here. News of the confrontation spread quickly. By the next morning, the people of Clearwater were beginning to believe that they could stand up to the Iron Serpents. Volunteers turned out in greater numbers to help with patrols and training. Maggie's Diner became the unofficial headquarters, buzzing with activity as people exchanged information and planned their next steps. But the Iron Serpents weren't sitting idle. 2 nights later, a fire broke out at the old mill. Ethan and his team's surveillance indicated it was a deliberate act meant to send a warning. Flames lit up the sky, and thick smoke poured into the streets. Ethan, Tom, and several others arrived just as the volunteer fire department was bringing the blaze under control. They're escalating, Tom said grimly as they watched the smoldering ruins. They want us to react emotionally, Ethan said. We can't afford that. Stick to the plan. That night, Angela and Luis worked overtime to install additional cameras and sensors throughout the town. By morning, Clearwater was a digital fortress, every vulnerable point covered by live surveillance. But it wasn't just about defense. Ethan had a counterstrike in mind. Victor Kane had made a critical mistake. In his arrogance, he'd allowed his gang to operate too openly. They'd claimed the old mill as their base, and they weren't particularly cautious about who saw them coming and going. Using Angela's surveillance feed, Ethan and Jess, the team strategist, mapped out the gang's movements. They discovered that the Serpents had a supply chain that ran through a remote back road outside of town. They've got a shipment coming in tonight, Angela reported. We take it out, we hit them where it hurts. Ethan nodded. Let's do it. That night, the veterans set up an ambush on the back road. Ethan, Tom, Jess, and Sheriff Lucas took position near a bend, concealed by the dense forest. Angela monitored the operation remotely, guiding the team with real-time updates. Shortly after midnight, headlights pierced the darkness. 2 vans, escorted by a pair of bikers, rumbled down the dirt road. Ethan signaled for the team to hold their positions. As the convoy slowed to navigate the bend, Ethan and Tom stepped into the road, their weapons drawn. Sheriff Lucas emerged behind them, his cruiser's lights flashing. Stop right there, Ethan commanded. The lead biker hesitated, but the driver of the first van hit the brakes. Tom moved quickly, wrenching open the door and pulling the driver out. What's in the vans? Ethan demanded. Nothing you want to mess with, the biker sneered. Ethan's steely gaze didn't waver. Then you won't mind if we take a look. Jess opened the back of the van, revealing crates filled with stolen goods, electronics, liquor, and weapons. Sheriff Lucas stepped forward. This is evidence now, he said. You're all under arrest. The bikers looked ready to fight, but the sight of Ethan's calm resolve and Tom's towering presence convinced them otherwise. By dawn, the stolen goods were secured in the sheriff's evidence room, and the bikers were in custody. It was a small but significant victory. Victor Kane was furious when he heard the news. But for the people of Clearwater, it was proof that the Iron Serpents could be beaten. Ethan stood outside his hardware store that morning, watching the new flag flutter in the breeze. Beside him, Maggie handed him a cup of coffee. They're not going to stop, she said. I know, Ethan replied. Neither are we. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in months, Clearwater felt like it had a fighting chance. The Iron Serpents weren't accustomed to losing. For years, they'd operated with impunity, bullying small towns like Clearwater into submission. But the ambush on their supply convoy shook their confidence. Ethan Cross and his team had done more than just seize stolen goods. They'd sent a message. Clearwater was no longer theirs to control. Victor Kane paced inside the Iron Serpent's clubhouse at the old mill, his boots echoing off the concrete floor. The air was heavy with tension as his lieutenants sat in uneasy silence. "That old man," Kane growled, slamming his fist against a table, "thinks he can waltz into my town and take what's mine?" "We underestimated him," one of the lieutenants admitted, glancing nervously at Kane. "These aren't regular civilians. They're veterans. They know what they're doing." Kane glared. "I don't care who they are. They're still human. Everyone breaks when you push hard enough." Another gang member spoke up. "We could call in help. The Serpent's chapter in Ashton owes us a favor." Kane shook his head. "No outsiders. This is our fight. We handle it." His plan was simple. Overwhelm Clearwater with brute force and make an example of Ethan Cross and his team. Meanwhile, in the heart of Clearwater, Ethan and his team were bolstering the town's defenses. Surveillance had revealed a worrying pattern. The Serpents were consolidating their forces, gathering more gang members at their mill compound. "They're preparing for something big," Angela reported, her fingers flying across her laptop as she monitored live feeds. Too much activity for it to be routine. Ethan studied the screen, his expression grave. "They're going to try to make a statement." Sheriff Lucas joined the group, his face set with determination. "Whatever they're planning, we need to be ready. This town can't go back to living in fear." "We won't let that happen," Ethan said firmly. The veterans divided their efforts. Luis worked with the townsfolk to reinforce key locations, creating secure zones at the community center, the diner, and the school. Angela installed additional surveillance equipment, ensuring there were no blind spots. Tom and Jess led training sessions, teaching volunteers how to respond to different threats. But Ethan knew that preparation wasn't enough. The Serpents needed to see that Clearwater wasn't just defending itself, it was ready to strike back. That night, Ethan led a small team on a reconnaissance mission. Using the cover of darkness, they approached the Iron Serpent's mill compound. Angela had hacked into nearby traffic cameras, giving them a clear view of the surrounding area. The mill was heavily guarded. Gang members patrolled the perimeter, their figures silhouetted against the dim floodlights. Motorcycles were lined up outside, and the sound of loud music and laughter drifted into the night. "They're gearing up," Tom whispered, crouching beside Ethan behind a row of bushes. Ethan nodded. "They think they're invincible. Let's remind them they're not." Using binoculars, Jess pointed to a stack of crates near the back of the compound. "Those look like weapon shipments. If we can disable their arsenal, they'll lose their advantage." Ethan considered the suggestion. "It's risky, but if we can pull it off, it'll send a strong message." The next evening, the plan went into motion. Ethan, Tom, Jess, and Luis formed the strike team, while Angela monitored the operation from the command center. Sheriff Lucas coordinated with a backup unit, prepared to step in if things went south. The veterans moved with the precision of soldiers who had faced far greater dangers. They bypassed the main entrance, circling around to the back of the compound where the crates were stored. Luis worked quickly, planting small charges designed to disable but not destroy. "Non-lethal," he muttered, securing the last charge. "We're here to send a message, not start a war." Suddenly, a flashlight beam swept across the area. One of the Serpents had wandered into their path. Ethan signaled for the team to freeze, holding his breath as the biker's footsteps drew closer. Tom, positioned a few feet away, acted fast. He stepped out of the shadows, his massive frame towering over the startled man. "Lost something?" Tom growled. Before the Serpent could react, Tom disarmed him, pressing a finger to his lips. "Quiet, and you won't get hurt." The man nodded, his wide eyes filled with fear. The team finished their work and retreated as silently as they had arrived. Moments later, a series of muffled explosions echoed through the night. The Serpent's weapons cache was now unusable. The next morning, the Iron Serpents found their compound in disarray. Kane arrived to find his men scrambling to assess the damage. The crates were intact, but their contents were useless. Guns with severed firing pins, ammunition soaked in oil. "This is what happens when you push the wrong people," Kane growled. One of his lieutenants hesitated. Boss, maybe we should. Don't say it, Kane snapped. We don't back down. Not ever. But for the first time, doubt crept into the gang's ranks. Back in Clearwater, the mood was cautiously optimistic. The strike on the mill had bolstered the town's confidence. At Maggie's diner, the veterans gathered to discuss the next steps. Maggie poured coffee for the group, a hint of pride in her voice. You've got the town believing in themselves again. That's something. It's not enough, Ethan said, his tone serious. We've hurt them, but they're not going to stop. We need to be ready for their retaliation. Tom leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. What's the endgame, Ethan? We can't just keep trading blows with them. The endgame, Ethan replied, is making it so they can't come back. We take away their power, their fear, their control. And we show this town what it means to stand together. Angela's laptop beeped, drawing her attention. We've got movement at the mill, she announced. Looks like they're regrouping. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then so are we. As the day wore on, Clearwater prepared for what was coming. Volunteers worked alongside the veterans to fortify the town's defenses. Sheriff Lucas coordinated with nearby law enforcement, ensuring reinforcements were available if needed. And Ethan stood on the steps of his hardware store, watching the flag flutter in the breeze. This isn't just a fight for Clearwater, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. It's a fight for what's right. The stage was set for the next confrontation, and Ethan knew the stakes couldn't be higher. The Iron Serpents were cornered, but cornered animals were the most dangerous. The air in Clearwater was thick with tension. The Iron Serpents had suffered a humiliating blow, and everyone in town knew their retaliation was coming. Ethan Cross stood on the edge of town, scanning the horizon. The veterans had fortified every major area, but this time, Ethan wasn't just thinking about defenses, he was thinking about how to end the gang's reign for good. Inside Maggie's diner, the team reviewed their plans. The atmosphere was grim but focused. Sheriff Lucas laid a map of the town on the table, marking key choke points. They'll likely come from the north, Lucas said, pointing to the old highway. We've seen increased activity on that route. Angela, Sparrow, Martin nodded, her laptop open to live surveillance feeds. They've been moving in larger groups, likely to test our response times. Ethan studied the map. This won't be a hit and run. Kane's pride won't allow it. He'll come at us with everything he's got. Tom, Bulldog. Hayes leaned forward, his expression steely. Then we make sure they regret it. Maggie approached with a fresh pot of coffee, her voice steady despite the tension. Whatever happens, the town's behind you. People are tired of living in fear. Good, Ethan replied. Because this time, we're not just defending Clearwater. We're ending this. That evening, Angela intercepted a message from one of her informants, a former gang member who had turned against the Iron Serpents. Kane's planning a full-scale assault, she reported. 40 bikes, a couple of trucks, and enough firepower to make this ugly. Do we know when? Ethan asked. Midnight, Angela replied. They want to hit us when we're tired. Then we'll be ready, Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. The veterans worked quickly, positioning themselves across town. Luis, the team's engineer, set up barriers at key entry points, while Angela coordinated the surveillance feeds. Sheriff Lucas organized the town's volunteers, stationing them at the community center and the school, the two most likely targets for collateral damage. Jess mapped out evacuation routes, ensuring that civilians had a clear path to safety if things escalated. Clearwater isn't just a town, Jess said as she briefed the volunteers. It's your home. Fight for it, but be smart. We don't need heroes. We need survivors. At precisely midnight, the roar of motorcycles shattered the quiet night. The Iron Serpents approached from 3 directions, their engines echoing off the buildings. Victor Kane led the charge, his bike gleaming under the moonlight. Behind him, the gang moved like a swarm, their headlights cutting through the darkness. At the first checkpoint, Luis and Tom stood ready. As the bikes approached, Tom raised his hand, signaling the gang to stop. Turn back, he called out, his voice carrying over the engines. The lead biker sneered. Or what? Tom's answer was swift. He fired a warning shot into the air, the sound reverberating through the night. Or you find out. The bikers hesitated, but Kane's voice boomed from behind them. Push through. They don't have what it takes to stop us. The gang surged forward, but Luis's barricade slowed them down. As they tried to maneuver around the obstacles, Ethan's team sprang into action. Angela had coordinated precise movements, ensuring every veteran knew their role. Tom and Luis worked to corral the bikers into a narrow alley where they couldn't use their numbers to their advantage. Meanwhile, Ethan and Jess flanked them, cutting off their escape routes. At the community center, Sheriff Lucas and a group of volunteers held the line. A second wave of serpents had targeted the building, hoping to cause chaos among the townspeople. But the sheriff and his team were ready. As the gang approached, Lucas stood his ground, his shotgun at the ready. "You're not welcome here," he said, his voice calm but resolute. One of the bikers laughed. "What's a small-town cop gonna do?" "More than you think," Lucas replied. The sheriff fired a warning shot, and his team of volunteers stepped forward, armed with non-lethal weapons. The gang faltered, unprepared for the town's unity. Back at the mill, Victor Kane's plan was unraveling. He had underestimated the veterans' tactical expertise and the town's determination. His forces were scattered, their communications jammed by Angela's countermeasures. This wasn't supposed to happen. Kane snarled, slamming his fist against his bike's handlebars. Ethan appeared from the shadows, his voice calm but commanding. "It's over, Kane. Walk away while you still can." Kane turned to face him, his eyes blazing with fury. "You think you've won? I don't back down." Ethan stepped closer, his posture steady. "This isn't about winning. It's about stopping you from destroying this town." Kane laughed bitterly. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just an old man who doesn't know when to quit." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "I've seen men like you before. Bullies who think fear equals power. But fear fades, Kane. Brotherhood doesn't." The final confrontation erupted in a chaotic clash. Kane's remaining men, realizing they were outmaneuvered, made a desperate push to regroup. But Ethan's team had anticipated every move. Luis disabled the gang's vehicles with precision, while Jess coordinated the containment of fleeing bikers. Tom and Sheriff Lucas rounded up the stragglers, ensuring they couldn't regroup. Victor Kane, realizing he was alone, tried to escape, but Ethan was waiting for him. Kane revved his bike, aiming to barrel past Ethan, but the veteran sidestepped at the last second, pulling Kane from his seat in one swift motion. The two men tumbled to the ground, grappling in the dirt. Years of combat training gave Ethan the edge. He pinned Kane down, his voice calm but firm. "It's over." Kane struggled, his defiance faltering. "You don't get it. Someone will always take my place." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but not here. Not anymore." By dawn, the Iron Serpents were no more. Victor Kane and his men were in custody, and the town of Clearwater stood victorious. At Maggie's diner, the townspeople gathered to celebrate. Ethan and his team stood quietly in the corner, watching the town come alive with hope. Sheriff Lucas approached Ethan, a rare smile on his face. "You did it." "We all did," Ethan replied. "This town isn't afraid anymore." Maggie raised a toast, her voice ringing out over the crowd. "To Clearwater. To standing together." The diner erupted in cheers, but Ethan's thoughts were already elsewhere. The battle was won, but the fight for lasting peace was just beginning. The victory over the Iron Serpents brought hope to Clearwater, but it also left the town in a fragile state. With Victor Kane and his gang members behind bars, the immediate threat had been neutralized. Yet, Ethan Cross knew better than to celebrate too soon. "If history's taught me anything," Ethan told Sheriff Lucas over coffee at Maggie's diner, "it's that trouble doesn't just vanish. When one threat's removed, another always finds its way in." Lucas frowned. "You think someone will try to fill the serpent's void?" Ethan nodded. "The gang world doesn't tolerate power vacuums. Someone will come looking, either to claim what's left or to punish us for taking Kane down." The first sign of trouble came a week later. Angela, Sparrow, Martin intercepted a suspicious communication on an encrypted channel. "Looks like someone's asking questions about Clearwater," she reported, pulling up the message on her laptop. "A group calling themselves the Black Vipers. They're bigger than the Iron Serpents. Smarter, too." Sheriff Lucas leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowed. "What do we know about them?" Cartel-affiliated, Angela explained. They run guns, drugs, and extortion across 3 states. If they're interested in Clearwater, it's not just to pick up the pieces. They're looking to expand. Ethan studied the data on Angela's screen. We need to know when they're coming and how many to expect. While Angela monitored the Black Viper's movements, the rest of the veterans got to work fortifying the town. This time, the preparations went beyond physical defenses. Ethan and his team began training the townspeople in community vigilance. "This isn't just about us protecting you," Ethan told the gathered crowd during a training session at the community center. "It's about teaching you how to protect yourselves. If Clearwater is going to stay safe, it has to start from within." Luis set up a series of workshops, teaching basic skills like first aid and radio communication. Jess worked with local volunteers to create an emergency response team, while Tom focused on physical defense training. "This is about more than just fighting back," Jess explained to her group. "It's about being prepared, staying calm, and working together when things get tough." By the end of the week, Angela had pinpointed the Black Viper's timeline. "They'll be here in 2 days," she said, her voice tense. "They're sending a recon team first, but if they like what they see, they'll come in full force." Ethan called an emergency meeting with the veterans and Sheriff Lucas. "We can't let this escalate," Ethan began. "If the Vipers get a foothold here, they'll turn Clearwater into a hub for their operations." Sheriff Lucas nodded. "So, what's the plan?" "We cut them off before they get the chance," Ethan replied. "Intercept their recon team and send a clear message. Clearwater isn't open for business." The recon team arrived under the cover of darkness. A pair of SUVs with tinted windows rolled into town, their occupants scanning the streets with predatory interest. Angela, monitoring the live feeds, alerted the team. "They're here. 2 vehicles, 4 men, heavily armed." Ethan and Tom positioned themselves at the town's main intersection, concealed behind a row of parked cars. Jess and Luis waited further down the road, ready to block the SUV's escape if necessary. "Hold positions," Ethan said over the radio. "We let them come to us." The SUVs slowed as they neared the intersection, the men inside clearly suspicious of the quiet streets. The lead vehicle came to a stop, and 2 men stepped out, scanning the area with military precision. Ethan stepped into view, his hands raised in a gesture of caution. "Evening, gentlemen," he called out. "You're not from around here, are you?" The men froze, their hands hovering near their holsters. "Who's asking?" one of them barked. "Just someone who cares about this town," Ethan replied, his tone steady. "And someone who doesn't appreciate uninvited guests." The tension was palpable as the men sized Ethan up. "You don't know who you're messing with," the second man warned. Ethan's expression didn't waver. "Actually, I do. You're part of the Black Vipers, a cartel-affiliated gang looking to expand. But let me save you the trouble. Clearwater's not interested." The first man smirked. "You think you can scare us off? We've handled worse than a few locals playing soldier." Ethan's team moved into view, their presence unmistakably professional. Tom cracked his knuckles, and Jess stared them down with the cold precision of a seasoned sniper. "You sure about that?" Ethan asked. The standoff ended without violence, but the message was clear. The Black Vipers recon team left town, but not without a parting threat. "You'll regret this," one of the men spat as he climbed back into the SUV. "The Vipers don't take no for an answer." As the SUVs disappeared down the highway, Ethan turned to his team. "This isn't over. They'll be back, and they'll bring more next time." Tom crossed his arms. "Let them. We'll be ready." The next day, Sheriff Lucas received an anonymous tip about a meeting spot just outside town, a warehouse where the Vipers were staging their next move. Ethan called for a scouting mission. "If we can disrupt their plans before they strike, we might avoid a full-scale invasion." Jess and Luis volunteered for the job, moving under the cover of night to gather intel. The warehouse was crawling with Vipers, their vehicles loaded with weapons and supplies. "They're gearing up for a big operation," Jess whispered into her radio. "This isn't just about Clearwater. They're planning to use this place as a distribution hub." Luis snapped photos of the weapons cache, his hands steady despite the tension. "We need to take this out," he muttered. Ethan's voice came through the earpiece. "Hold your position. We'll regroup and plan our next move." This isn't something we can handle on the fly. Back in Clearwater, the team reviewed the intel. Angela projected the photos onto a screen, highlighting key targets. We take out their weapons, we cripple their operation, she explained. Sheriff Lucas frowned. And if they retaliate? They will, Ethan said. But it won't matter. We'll make sure they don't have the means to do any real damage. As the sun set, the veterans prepared for their most daring mission yet. They knew the risks. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But they also knew that the stakes were too high to back down. This is about more than Clearwater, Ethan said as he addressed the group. It's about sending a message to every gang, cartel, and criminal who thinks they can take what they want. We're not just defending a town. We're defending a way of life. The room fell silent as his words sank in. Then, one by one, the veterans nodded, their resolve unshaken. The fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The team moved under the cover of night, their plans finalized and their resolve unshaken. Ethan Cross led the way, his calm demeanor masking the storm of thoughts running through his mind. Jess, Tom, Angela, Luis, and Sheriff Lucas followed, each carrying the weight of what they were about to do. This isn't just about Clearwater anymore, Ethan had said during the briefing. If we don't stop them here, they'll spread their poison to every town in the region. We have to make this count. The warehouse stood on the outskirts of Clearwater, a hulking shadow against the moonlit sky. Black Viper vehicles lined the lot, their drivers unloading crates of weapons and supplies under the watchful eyes of heavily armed guards. Angela whispered into her radio from her concealed position atop a nearby ridge. 10 vehicles. At least 20 operatives outside, possibly more inside. They've got a tight perimeter, but I see gaps in their rotation. Ethan acknowledged her report. Tom, Luis, you're with me. We'll handle the explosives. Jess, you're on Overwatch. Angela, keep feeding us intel. Lucas, coordinate the fallback route in case things get messy. Got it, the sheriff replied. The team moved with practiced precision, using the shadows to their advantage. Jess climbed into position on an abandoned water tower, her sniper rifle scanning the area for threats. First guard, east side. Walking solo, Jess whispered. Hold, Ethan replied. Let him pass. The guard walked by, oblivious to the presence of the team. Once he was clear, Luis and Ethan slipped past the crates and toward the main structure. Tom followed, carrying a satchel of explosives. Inside the warehouse, the scene was chaotic. Viper operatives barked orders, moving crates filled with automatic weapons, ammunition, and explosives. At the center of it all stood their leader, a tall, muscular man with a jagged scar across his face. That's Raul Vargas, Angela reported, her voice tense over the radio. He's a big deal in the Viper organization. If we take him out, this operation falls apart. Not yet, Ethan said. We're not here to pick a fight. We're here to cripple their operation. The team slipped inside through a side entrance, navigating between stacks of crates. Luis placed small charges on key targets, while Tom worked on setting up a chain reaction. 2 more guards coming your way, Angela warned. Ethan motioned for the team to take cover. The guards passed by without noticing anything amiss, their conversation casual. Once these charges go off, we'll only have a few minutes to get out, Luis whispered, double-checking his work. Understood, Ethan replied. Meanwhile, Jess maintained her watch from the water tower. Through her scope, she saw Vargas speaking with one of his lieutenants. They're loading up one of the trucks with what looks like high-grade explosives, Jess reported. Angela confirmed from her vantage point. They're prepping for something big. We can't let that truck leave. Ethan sighed, weighing their options. All right, we take out the truck, too. Jess, you've got the shot if they try to move it. Copy that, Jess said, adjusting her aim. As the team continued planting charges, one of the guards noticed something unusual. He bent down, examining the faint glimmer of a detonator wire peeking out from a crate. Hey, what's this? The guard shouted. The entire warehouse erupted into chaos. Guards drew their weapons, shouting orders as they searched for intruders. Move now, Ethan commanded, his voice sharp over the radio. Luis and Tom finished setting the last of the charges while Ethan covered them, his pistol drawn. The guards fanned out, sweeping the area with flashlights. Jess took her first shot, her bullet dropping a guard who was closing in on Luis. Shots fired. "Intruders!" a guard shouted. The warehouse erupted into a firefight. Jess continued picking off guards from her position, while Ethan and Tom provided cover for Luis to retreat. "Angela, how's our exit looking?" Ethan asked as bullets ricocheted off metal crates around them. "Clear for now, but they're circling back. You've got about 2 minutes before they block the route," Angela replied. "Then we're out in one," Ethan said. Raul Vargas roared over the chaos, rallying his men. "Find them. I want them alive." The Black Vipers moved in a coordinated sweep, but the veterans' training gave them the edge. Ethan led his team toward the exit, his movements precise and deliberate. "Luis, blow the truck," Ethan ordered as they passed the vehicle loaded with explosives. Luis hurled a grenade under the truck and sprinted after the team. The resulting explosion rocked the warehouse, sending guards diving for cover. Jess called out over the radio, "You've got movement on the east side. Reinforcements inbound." "Keep them off us," Ethan replied. The charges Luis and Tom had planted began detonating in sequence. Crates of weapons exploded, sending shrapnel and flames across the warehouse. The Black Vipers scattered, their operation falling apart in the chaos. Vargas shouted orders, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the explosions. "Jess, we're clear. Time to go." Ethan radioed. Jess fired one last shot, taking out a Viper who was closing in on the team, before climbing down from the water tower. Outside the warehouse, the team regrouped. The structure behind them was engulfed in flames, its contents destroyed. Ethan turned to his team, his face grim but resolute. "That'll slow them down, but it won't stop them. Vargas won't take this lying down," he said. Sheriff Lucas arrived in a patrol car, skidding to a halt. "The Vipers are going to retaliate after this," he warned. "I know," Ethan replied, "but now we have the upper hand. They're weaker than they were before, and they know Clearwater isn't an easy target." As dawn broke, the team returned to town, exhausted but determined. Maggie greeted them with coffee and sandwiches, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You've bought us time," she said, her voice steady. Ethan nodded. "Time to prepare for what's next. They'll come back, but so will we. Stronger than ever." The team sat in silence, sharing a quiet moment of camaraderie before the next storm. The fight for Clearwater wasn't over, but they had proven once again that when a community stands together, even the strongest enemy can be brought to its knees. The sun rose over Clearwater, casting a golden hue over the battered but unbroken town. The Black Vipers' warehouse lay in ruins, their carefully laid plans reduced to ashes by the precision and unity of the veteran-led defense. Yet, Ethan Cross knew the war wasn't over. He stood on the edge of town, scanning the horizon where the open road stretched into the unknown. Sheriff Lucas approached, his face set with determination. "We've received reports from neighboring towns. The Vipers are rallying. Vargas isn't letting this go." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "We hit them where it hurts, and now they're coming for us. But we're not going to let Clearwater fall. Not now. Not ever." Back at the community center, the veterans gathered to discuss their next steps. Jess, Luis, Tom, Angela, and Sheriff Lucas were all there, their faces mirroring Ethan's resolve. The town's leaders, including Maggie and several other citizens, joined them. Clearwater was no longer just relying on its defenders. It was becoming a community ready to stand up for itself. Ethan began, "This isn't just about Clearwater anymore. The Vipers see this town as a symbol, a challenge to their control. If they take us down, they send a message to every other town trying to resist. But if we hold our ground, we send a message of our own." Jess leaned forward, her voice calm and measured. "We've taken out their weapons depot and disrupted their plans. That means they'll come at us with everything they've got. We need to be ready." Tom, ever the practical one, added, "We've got the advantage of knowing the terrain. If they're stupid enough to attack us here, we can make them regret it." Angela, the team's tech expert, pulled up a map on her laptop. "Their communications are encrypted, but I've been able to track their movements. Vargas is assembling his forces about 30 miles out. They're planning a full-scale assault, vehicles, weapons, and reinforcements from their cartel allies. The room fell silent for a moment as the gravity of the situation set in. Then Maggie, her voice firm, broke the tension. "What do you need from us?" Ethan smiled faintly. "You've already given us so much, but now we need everyone to pull together. We'll train those willing to fight and evacuate those who can't. We'll fortify key positions and set traps along their approach. This isn't just our fight anymore. It's all of ours." Over the next 2 days, Clearwater transformed into a fortress of resilience. Under the veterans' guidance, townsfolk reinforced barricades, set up checkpoints, and prepared emergency shelters. Jess worked with a group of volunteers, teaching them marksmanship and tactical positioning. "This isn't about being a hero," she reminded them. "It's about surviving and protecting what matters most." Luis led efforts to build improvised defenses, repurposing farm equipment and construction materials to create barriers and traps. Tom coordinated supply runs, ensuring the town had enough food, water, and medical supplies to withstand a siege. Angela, working tirelessly from her mobile command center, intercepted Viper communications and relayed updates to the team. "They're on the move," she reported on the second night. "They'll hit us at dawn." Ethan gathered the town at Maggie's Diner, which had become the de facto heart of Clearwater's resistance. "Tomorrow, the Vipers will come for us," he said, his voice steady. "But we're ready. We've stood together before, and we'll stand together again. Remember, this isn't just about fighting back. It's about proving we're stronger than fear." The room erupted in applause, the townsfolk drawing strength from Ethan's unwavering resolve. At dawn, the Vipers arrived. A convoy of vehicles roared down the highway, their engines echoing like a thunderstorm. Raul Vargas led the charge, his scarred face twisted into a mask of rage and determination. "They think they can defy us?" he growled to his lieutenant. "We'll teach them what it means to challenge the Vipers." But as the convoy approached Clearwater, they encountered the first of many surprises. A series of trenches, reinforced with spikes and barbed wire, forced the vehicles to slow. Hidden pits and tire-shredding traps disabled several trucks, sending the operatives scrambling for cover. Jess, perched atop a water tower, took her first shot, dropping a gunman attempting to breach the barricades. Her precision sent ripples of panic through the Vipers. "Pick your targets," she reminded the volunteers stationed with her. "Don't waste ammo. Every shot counts." Ethan and Tom led a flanking maneuver, moving through a series of concealed paths to outmaneuver the attackers. Luis detonated a carefully placed charge, collapsing a section of the highway and cutting off the Vipers' reinforcements. The Vipers, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with brute force, found themselves outmatched at every turn. Their ranks thinned as the defenders used their knowledge of the terrain to devastating effect. Raul Vargas, furious and desperate, stormed toward the front lines. "Push through," he shouted. "They're just a bunch of farmers and old soldiers." But when Vargas reached the barricades, he came face to face with Ethan. The two men locked eyes, and for a moment, the chaos around them seemed to fade. "You've already lost," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. Vargas sneered. "We don't lose. We crush." "Not here," Ethan replied. "Not this time." The fight that followed was brutal and personal, a clash of will and determination. Ethan's experience and precision gave him the edge, but Vargas fought with the desperation of a man who knew his empire was crumbling. Finally, Ethan disarmed Vargas, pinning him to the ground as Sheriff Lucas and his deputies arrived to take the gang leader into custody. With Vargas captured and the remaining Vipers retreating, the battle came to an end. The town erupted in cheers as the defenders regrouped, their victory hard-earned but complete. As the sun set over Clearwater, Ethan and his team gathered at Maggie's Diner. The atmosphere was a mix of relief and celebration. The townsfolk shared stories of their bravery, each one a testament to their newfound strength. Sheriff Lucas approached Ethan, a rare smile on his face. "You've done something incredible here, Ethan. This town owes you everything." Ethan shook his head. "This town owes itself. We just reminded you of what you were capable of all along." Over the next few weeks, Clearwater's story spread far beyond the town's borders. Communities across the region reached out, inspired by the courage and unity that had defeated the Vipers. Ethan and his team began working on a broader initiative, teaching other towns how to defend themselves and build strong, resilient communities. Jess and Luis led training sessions, while Angela used her tech skills to set up secure communication networks. One evening, as the team sat around a fire outside Ethan's cabin, Angela raised a toast. To Clearwater, she said, and to proving that when people stand together, they can face anything. The others raised their glasses, their faces lit by the firelight and the knowledge that they had made a difference. Clearwater had transformed from a town gripped by fear to a beacon of hope, proving that even in the darkest times, unity and resolve could light the way forward. The battle was over, but the legacy of their victory would endure, a testament to the power of standing together against chaos.